Top House Republicans are condemning comments made by a member of their own party, Georgia Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. She compared public health measures to the Holocaust. In a tweet Tuesday, the Congresswoman said a local supermarket's decision to require employees to display a logo indicating they were vaccinated was, quote, just like the Nazis forced Jewish people to wear a gold star. Last week, Greene told the Christian Broadcasting Network House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's support for a mask mandate on the House floor was similar to Nazism. In a statement, House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy said the Congresswoman's, quote, intentional decision to compare the horrors of the Holocaust with wearing masks is appalling. Greene was stripped of her committee assignments in February after promoting conspiracy theories and posting anti-Semitic and anti-Muslim videos. It's unclear whether her latest comments will result in repercussions. Joining me now to discuss that and more is Congressman Byron Donalds. He's a Republican who represents Florida's 19th congressional district. Congressman Donalds, welcome to Red and Blue. Before we talk about Congresswoman Greene, I'd like to get your thoughts on this day. It has been 1 year since George Floyd died at the hands of police, and I know you have talked publicly about how growing up in Brooklyn, New York, you saw people call the police for help. What do you think needs to happen to prevent another death like George Floyd's from happening again?
Listen, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. I think there's a number of things that I think are going to happen and do need to happen. Number one, I will tell you, a lot of police departments in our communities have already gone through a lot of reforms internally, a lot of self-evaluation, trying to find ways to do things better. That's number one. Number two, legislation that comes out of D.C. I think is really going to be additive to the reforms that local departments are going through. It's not going to be the magic key, if you will, to unlocking clean opportunities and clean responses and frankly, clean interactions between people of law enforcement and people in our communities. That's number two. I think that if you do things like actually study some of the stuff dealing with no-knock warrants and the like, trying to make sure that the holes that are administered, which are needed sometimes in the line of duty, are administered in the most appropriate way, making sure that law enforcement officers get the continued mental health and psychological evaluations that I do believe they need, because they have one of the toughest jobs in the country. They are constantly having to see some of the cruelest things that happens when one citizen victimizes another, and our officers are on the front lines for that. But I think it's important to understand that even though this is the 1 year anniversary of the death of George Floyd, we have close to 30 to 40 million interactions between citizens and law enforcement. When these things go wrong, and in the case of George Floyd, they go terribly wrong, we are all saddened by that. But we have to remember that our law enforcement officers do serve our communities with honor and distinction the vast majority of the time.
Switching gears, recently, Congressman, you called Congresswoman Liz Cheney a distraction for the Republican Party. And I wonder what your thoughts are now on Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene. Is what she said, are her comments a distraction from your perspective?
They are. I disagree with what Marjorie said about masks and the Holocaust. I think she's wrong for that. And that's something where she's going to have to explain herself in more detail. But I think it's just somewhat a slight difference. Chairwoman Cheney, at the time she was chairwoman, she was in leadership in our caucus. Marjorie is not in leadership in our caucus. And so we have members on both sides of the aisle who say things that a lot of members don't agree with. I think this is one where Marjorie has to speak up for herself about what she said. As far as it being a distraction from what we're doing, this is something you don't want to see. But at the same time, our caucus, is focused on making sure that we advocate for the right policies for our country. We put forward those ideas, and we stay focused on the next round of elections, which are coming faster than most people realize.
I want to turn to voting access. House Minority Leader McCarthy said outside the White House recently that no one was questioning the legitimacy of the 2020 election. But Congressman, how do you square that with so many Republican-led states, Florida among them, moving to restrict voting access under the banner of election integrity, coupled with former President Trump's claims of widespread voter fraud?
Well, we have to separate two things. Number one, Florida's new law doesn't restrict voter access. We have actually one of the most available access points for voting in the United States. I've been voting in the state of Florida for 20 years now, longer than I've been elected. And so I've been voting here since I was 18 years old. There's really nothing that stops you from being able to go and cast your vote. If you have an ID, which I've had since I was 13 years old, you can go vote. If you know where your precinct is, you can go vote. You can still request them by mail. I think the thing that's important to understand is what Republicans have been doing is making sure that our elections are secure. We want to make sure that nobody has the opportunity to say that something didn't look right or wasn't up to snuff. I think if you look back at the last elections in 2020, it's very clear that their election laws in many states and in some localities were simply violated or ignored. And the pandemic was used as the excuse to do that. What happened in our state here in Florida is a continued update of our laws. We've been doing that, frankly, since 2000, when we had the issue with hanging chads. And that's why Florida has the best election law in the country. But if you want to see who has access to the ballot, is there more access in the state of Delaware or New York or the state of Florida? It is clear the state of Florida has far more access to the ballot than those other two states.
So in 2016 and 2018, almost a third of Florida voters cast ballots by mail. Besides 2020, more Republicans tend to vote by mail than Democrats. How do you think that may impact your party's prospects?
Actually, I'm not overly concerned about it. Like I said, what I look at is security. Our state has actually been a leader in voting by mail. We've been doing it for quite some time. I think Republicans might continue to pick that back up in 2022 and beyond and vote by mail. But in Florida, what we've done, and frankly, we're the best in the country, is we've made sure that our citizens, whether they are elderly, whether they are young, whether they are poor, whether they are rich, whether they're white or whether they're black, have the opportunity to go cast ballots. And these disenfranchised arguments simply are not the case in our state. Our voting history the last 20 years is proof of that.
Do you think that raising questions about election integrity, though, may ultimately cause some people to not trust the process and come out at all, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrats?
That part is somewhat a concern, but again, that's why I say, if you look at what the states are doing, they're going back in, they're updating their laws. They're making sure that people have the opportunity to cast ballots. That's what we did in Florida. That's what was done in Georgia. It was actually an expansion of voter access in the state of Georgia. Those are wonderful things that we should all applaud. The second thing, and this is what's really important, is security of the ballot. What we want to make sure of on our side of the aisle is that there's really a chain of custody, similar to a criminal case, a court case, where there's a chain of custody for evidence. We need to make sure there's a strong chain of custody for ballots. If you have that, then it makes it incredibly difficult for somebody to challenge or say something went wrong with your election. One of the issues we did see in 2020 that there were some chain of custody issues when it came to the balloting process. That was a concern. And it's important for state legislators, this is their job to write election law, to actually go and look at their laws and make sure that they're up to date and up to snuff so that we don't have to go through the questions about the integrity of elections.
I have a lot of questions that I'd love to ask you. We are unfortunately running out of time, but I want to end with this. Is there an area of bipartisanship where you could see yourself working with Democrats on any issue as you look at the political landscape right now?
You know, I got to tell you, it's going to be tough. I would hope that we could work together on financial reforms. What we've seen out of the COVID-19 environment is that community banks have been destroyed by Dodd-Frank. And I would hope that Democrats would want to come to the table and reform these old financial regulations that have actually hurt the financial industry and made it harder for micro businesses and for urban communities to get access to capital. I think that's something we should be able to work on together. But in the current environment, it is tough. Speaker Pelosi runs the House with an iron fist. It's hard for the members to actually get together or work on policy when that's the way the House works now. But hopefully that will change very shortly.
And I know he said that was the last question, but I have to ask you, you mentioned Speaker Pelosi. What role do you see former President Trump playing here in the Republican Party moving forward?
Oh, well, the president's going to be a part of our party, frankly, like former presidents typically are, no matter what their party comes from, no matter what party they're in. Excuse me. The president is still very popular in our party. He is outspoken. We all know that. He's not afraid of sharing his opinions. But the thing is important in all politics, not just Republican politics, is people need to be able to speak their mind. That's what the basis of our country is. I'm glad the president is outspoken and speaks on the things that he feels are important. But at the end of the day, whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, the voters of your party, they're the ones who are going to make the decisions about which way your party goes. And our voters are highly engaged, and I think they're going to continue to do so.
All right, Congressman Byron Donalds. Congressman, thanks very much.
Thank you for having me.